did. Well, what reason? He was on the city, my mom heard he said it on Friday. Was you really late or what? No, they said, they said, my doctor yeah, my doctor was in national cancer. Your mom's still fighting for her? She's not gonna go back. Where are you doing, somewhere in Old Bridge?
Well, no, my wife will be upset.
Well, my husband might. But I could put him over here.
No, that's all right.
And that would explain the whole thing, yes.
Yeah, to the slides of it.
Well, you're walking easy. I mean, that was,
Yeah.
we're walking.
He's always said he'd much rather have it. It's better than he wants.
I could agree with that.
It's easier.
Tonight, we had such.
Sit down. So the next handsome guy will come.
I messed up with you. I think adjusted.
Yeah.
And put it on there.
Yeah, she's just married one day, or I don't know if there's any.
She's probably heard enough of
That's a blessing.
to make herself known.
No, I know. I'm not, yeah.
It can be that way. I told him that's what I felt like it because of my age, the muscles losing their strength and had started letting things
This
shift.
fast.
What can he do?
Everybody else does.
It had gotten to the point I had to have a road block.
Did that help? Sometimes they don't. Sometimes.
I found out how to make them work.
What's that?
I mean, I don't think you'll get a lot of argument. Let's log on and see if we
I found out because I had the same thing back when I had my left hip.
So, let's see here.
Put the medicine in the
Somebody be able to tell me how to adjust it?
Gary, he's gonna get on. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, but that made it work.
He told me, he said, that is the best.
Well, can it zoom?
No, it's still showing.
That's good.
If you have somebody,
I'm fixing to get my knee replaced, so I'm sure I won't be.
Oh, there's a blade. You can check that one.
I gotta get a new knee next
There's that walking.
Let's go to outer space and back, you know. So.
That's kind of like basketball. It's like you should have gone solid or something.
Sometimes those things don't work though, so I'm so thankful.
Okay, I did already. Give it a minute.
That's horrible. And you never know if it's gonna get better. That's bad. I love that. Y'all had a car though, didn't you? I met Manny. And his bird nest, as he calls it. I'm glad it's working, and I hope it continues. Ain't right about that. It may be able to get better because it's better.
stand up out there. Those first three steps tell me how to do it.
Gotta listen to her body, that's for sure.
So I had went up so much.
I know, I'm hoping my hip's not getting messed up. But anyway.
She wanted to know if I wanted to sit there. I said,
Well, he was walking really slow towards my
Good
chair.
morning. It's time for us to begin.
I said, you can sit here.
If you'd like to turn your books, we're on lesson 5 for today. Anybody need a book?
It's still kind of.
It's still delayed.
Sorry, everything's covered with dust, so. So if you end up with chalk and all over your hands or clothes, you know it's because of the construction they did. There's a layer on everything, I noticed. Today, we're starting for the next 2 weeks, and starting Wednesday for the next 2 weeks, kind of the same subject, talking about fossils and the geology and fossil records. And I'm going to be concentrating on things they don't show, and then Lee's going to be concentrating on things that they do show. So you see a lot of overlap between the two, and of course that's going to be expected when you're talking about the same subject. But before we get into it, I'm going to call Lisa a word of prayer, please.
This hour, open our hearts and taking what is said and apply to our lives.
Amen. We were last week. We were at the zoo, and Cindy and my grandson were there. They discovered a T-Rex fossil there on the wall. So I thought I'd include that picture of them looking at that. Fossils. Anybody have any experience with fossils? Studying them or collecting them?
I collected them long ago.
Yeah. I don't think you can collect them anymore. I think they've all been collected, right? I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and in that area just south of there in Glen Rose is real popular for fossils. And we used to all the time go, I remember we had to do a fossil collection for one of my classes when I was really young. And you could go out and just find fossils everywhere. And of course, most of the fossils you find are these invertebrates, and they're very small animals. That's going to be 95% of the fossils that you find anyways. Matter of fact, most of the living organisms are that same way. I just heard an interesting figure about that. The weight of all the ants in the world outweigh all humanity and animal kingdom. The weight of all the ants in the world. There's so many, I don't know how many trillions or quadrillions, it was quadrillions of them. And it's, when you start looking at our...
I think they're in my backyard.
Yeah, a lot of them are. And it's pretty amazing when you start looking at creatures and some, we're going to talk about fossils. I don't know a lot about the fossilization process and all that, but we're going to talk about, the important things here for the next couple of weeks, and mainly going off what the author wanted us to concentrate on. He starts off here talking about the importance of the studies and why we do this. I know we kind of been mentioned last week about why are we studying these things, and maybe how much do we need to study it. But here the purpose is to counter the effect of naturalists or evolutionists by looking at fossils, and that's going to be our concentration for this next 2 weeks. And as Lee mentioned in the study on dinosaurs, and as we've talked about earlier too, is that the common worldview now is that the evolution is not a theory, but it's a proven fact. That's the way they treat it. They will talk about say that the fossil records show that. And so, at least if you have an idea about fossils and their some of the inconsistencies and assumptions that are made, you'll find that it really doesn't prove anything of what they're saying. The author here points out Colossians 2:1-4. Somebody can turn there. We'll read that. Colossians 2:1-4. Paul's writing to the church of Colossae and kind of gives them some guidance there about things in general.
He says, I want you to know how hard I am contending for you and for those at Laodicea and for all who have not met me personally. My goal is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I tell you this so that no one may deceive you by fine sounding arguments.
Okay, and so he's talking about, he's teaching God, he's teaching Christ in particular, and you think, well, what does that have to do with fossils, it has to do with God's creation. That's what we're looking at, that all this has to do with the creation of God, creation of the world, and the things that he revealed to us from the very beginning, and it's revealed in his word. And then verse 4 is, and my verse says that no one may delude you with plausible arguments, and you may have other things they're talking about there, but if we don't get to know God, know Christ, know his creation, understand the stories there, we're not going to we can be led astray with some arguments that sound fairly plausible, right? And sometimes, we're like, well, maybe there is something to this, but if you're ground firmly and you're in the faith, you won't have that problem. So today we're going to transition from the studies that we've done so far. We talked about origins, we talked about the age of the earth, we talked about dinosaurs. So now we get into geology and fossils.
Here,
Yes.
in the past, this wasn't an issue. I mean, we're talking 50, 60 years ago. We didn't have to know all these things to refute this error. Because most people were Bible believers, they were God believers, they believed in creation. And so, but until nowadays, not only do we have to understand some of this because of where people are, but also a lot of folks don't even believe the Bible is real.
Right.
And so sometimes, that used to never be a problem. So we got to figure out where people are. And I think that's why we need these kind of stories.
Exactly. You have to get on that common ground that, one, that believe that the scripture is real, and that God is, God exists and all that. So in a lot of ways, you have to go back to more basic, teachings, because you can't have that assumption anymore. Okay, well, everybody's going to believe in God and everybody's going to believe in the Word of God. It's just a matter of teaching them that. So so that's what importance of classes like this are for, so that you can show them some of the fallacies and some of the foolishness, really, of some of the things that are done here.
That same principle would apply to any false argument that's made. If we're going to try to teach somebody who believes in premillennialism, we need to have a basic understanding of premillennialism, if I can say that word, in order to be able to make a rational argument against it. We don't know what it is. How are you going to argue against something you don't understand? So anything that falls in the line, we need a little bit of an understanding in order to make a good argument.
Right, exactly. I was looking at a different book, and one thing I came across here is I thought it was kind of interesting is the study of evolution, which has to go hand in hand with fossils, right? Because fossils is what they use to try to prove evolution, and they're always searching for that missing link. But you can classify it as theology or metaphysics or philosophy, but not as science. And why? Because when you actually look at the scientific method, it's limited to these things. One, that is what it can be observed to the present, the how, not the why. Things that are amoral, which just means not moral, and limited in that it cannot deal with the unique, because you always have to have that ongoing, being able to repetitive, being able to repeat things. So really, you can make the argument that the study and evolution is really not even science, because it's all conjecture, it's all assumptions and extrapolation and just guessing when it comes down to it. So there's not really any sound science behind it. Does that make sense? Another thing I found here was there's an author here, Dr. G.A. Kirkett. He is an evolutionist who is a zoologist, and some of the evolutionists will admit that there's some problems, but that doesn't sway them off of it. And these were 7 assumptions that he came up in his book about things that are implying for evolution. First, that non-living things give rise to living material. that's what you call spontaneous generation, right? That's an assumption that something came from nothing, right? That's a big assumption. How often do we see something come from nothing? Oh, I know we never observe it, in our daily lives, and really there's been no evidence of anything happening like that, other than obviously except through creation, through a higher being. They assume that the spontaneous generation only occurred once, right? Which was a new one I didn't think about before. It's like we always think about it once, and it goes from there. Well, what kept the spontaneous generation from happening again and again, and then having all kinds of different offshoots and collisions and all this? But that's something that they're assuming. Thirdly, that the viruses, bacteria, plants, and animals are all interrelated, which we kind of understand that they're saying from, everything comes from one single source. Protozoa, there's a new word for you. I haven't heard that since I was in science class. Single-celled organisms give rise to the metazoa, which are multi-celled organisms. So they're saying, we start off with the single cell, and then you go to the multi-cell, and that's where it just kind of went from there. Fifth assumption is that various invertebrate phyla, which are organisms with no backbones, are interrelated, which kind of goes hand in hand with the previous one. The invertebrates give rise to the vertebrates, and that's one of the assumptions, that they're saying that nothing with a backbone eventually developed a backbone, and that the vertebrates, the fish gave rise to the amphibians, and that to the reptiles, to the birds and the mammals, which basically leads to us today. So that's their assumptions.
Number 4 actually does occur in all of us. We all started as a single cell.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's the way biology works. But they take that and extrapolate that from species to species.
Yeah.
That we end up in whatever we are, human, animal, dog. It starts at a single cell.
Actually, it starts off two.
You're right.
Egg and sperm.
You're right. She's right. But it ends up
Two single cells together.
Yeah. So really, we start two cell.
Yep. You're right.
Yeah.
And some of these, you can apply these. A lot of these you can apply to God, anyways. As far as spontaneous generation, He developed something from nothing. But that's was the power of God and the creation that we have. So I thought that was kind of interesting from an evolutionist to give these assumptions and to think about them. And that those are some of those are really big assumptions that occur on their own with no God involved, as they would say. The last sentence of his book, it says, "It is not clear whether the changes that bring about speculation are of the same nature as those that brought about the development of the new phyla. The answer can be found by future experimental work and not by dogmatic assertions that the general theory of evolution must be correct because there is nothing else that will satisfactorily take its place," which is a pretty big statement there. That he's admitting that a lot of people just making a dogmatic assertion because there's no other option to evolution, right?
It's a real good reason to believe in all that.
Yeah. So they not only they don't consider the God, a creator as an option. They said this is the only option it could be. Which if you don't believe in God and believe it exists, that's all you have to base your faith on, right? Is this evolution, because that's really the only explanation there could be if there wasn't a creator. So even a evolutionist, agrees that you can't be dogmatic on that. You need to look at the experimental work and try to find the answers, which they're still searching for those same answers they were looking for 150 years ago. I don't know if you remember last week I mentioned about Darwin. Darwin had said that he even though he came up with this theory, he says that, well, the fossil records later on will need to show that, that his theory was correct, and if it's not, then the theory is not valid, which goes along with all theories. Any comments on that?
This development of new phyla, that's macroevolution. That's jumping from one species to another species. That is not what we know is science when it comes to animals bringing forth after their kind.
Mhm.
It changes.
Right. And we'll be getting into a lot of that in the next couple of weeks. All right, in the book here, he has some terms to know. Let's look at 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5. If somebody could read that first. 2 Corinthians chapter 10.
For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ.
All right, so what is Paul saying here to the Corinthians? What's he trying to tell them? Okay.
Verse 5 is the key. Verse 5
Yeah.
is the key with destroy those strongholds, those arguments.
Right. And it says we need to destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. That's one of the things we do. You know, we've talked about how, you know, we need to, you know, love God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind. And part of that being the minds is that we need to know these things so we can fight against these arguments and be able to stand against them. So as we get into these terms, this will hopefully help our education and our knowledge. Some basic ones first. Geology is the study of earth. Paleontology is the study of fossils, which include animals and plants. Archaeology is the study of human history via excavation and remains. We have, he talks about the geologic column in the book, the graphic representation of layers of rocks. And then you got the Cambrian fossil layer, Earth's layer with fossils, life bearing, and it goes along with that is the Cambrian explosion. Pronounced development of a complex life in this layer. Any questions on any of those terms?
So we have offered a geology class in conjunction with this book study.
Yeah, we're gonna be touching a lot of different things, won't we? We got macro versus micro evolution. What Lee was referring to there. Macro is the macro meaning large, and that's the term that everything is evolved from a single point, where it's changing from species to species. But micro would be, small adaptations within a species, which we do see and observe today, and that is scientific when you think about it and look at it, right? We see how things can change, even in humans. The size of the people in different countries based on nutrition, is a lot different because of things like that.
And climate as well.
Climate, yeah, exactly. Transitional forms, those are fossils that are used by the naturalists to illustrate macroevolution. And we're going to talk about that in detail today and next week, because they tried to say that these fossils prove macroevolution, showing it from species to species. But when you really look at it, it doesn't do that.
Here we also commonly call that missing links.
Right, yeah. And there's been a lot of fraudulent things that have been done. I don't know if you remember over the years, there's always this, they found the missing link and they found out it was a fraud, Homology is the study of having same or similar relations. And a theory, when we talk about the theory of evolution, is the supposition of ideas intended to explain something, especially based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. So those are a few terms to think about. Most of those are in the book. Let's talk about, first of all, what is a fossil? Fossils are the remains, traces, or imprints of plants or animals that have been preserved in some type of rock layer. And the key thing here is fossils are remains of dead animals and plants that are buried in these layers that are hard to rock. It's a record of deaths of countless billions of animals and plants. It's not a record of their life, is it really? It's a record of their death. It's a record at their point of death. So any speculation on their life is exactly that, speculation. Any assumptions you come up with their life. For example, things you may, like what they sound like, right? Do we know what a T-Rex sounded like when it roared? If it roared, I don't know, maybe it sounded like a cat, I don't know. No one knows. Yeah. No one really knows, So it's all speculation. Then over time, people just come to accept it. Well, that's obviously the way it was, and you can make some assumptions based on the shape of the teeth, and what kind of their diet was. You can make assumptions on their skin covering based on some of the fossils, but really all you have available is at one point in time when they were preserved into that fossil, and anything before that and their lives, it's all just guessing. That makes sense.
Sure. Makes for better movies.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Any comments on that? You still have your fossil collection?
Mainly mine were those little round crinoids.
Yeah.
That's what we could find, but yes.
All right. So getting into the book today, the chapters that he has the fossil records does not support, and the first one here is evolutionary expectation and timeline. He brings out in Proverbs 18:17, the one who states his case seems right until the other comes and examines him. So just the first one that states a case about something, such as Darwin, right? Yeah, they may seem right because it's something new, it's something exciting, something kind of makes sense on the surface to some people. But until others come and examine it and prove it, that's just a proverb that I thought was a good one for that. Darwin gave theory and relied on future fossils to prove it. He, like I mentioned earlier, he admitted that records could be fatal to his theory if the records and the excavating and all that didn't come up with things that prove his theory. It could be fatal, and the theory could be proven false. And that's what theories are. They're theories. They're just guesses and ideas that you need to try to prove later before they become fact, and they're not facts until then.
Well, we need to remember too that I know we talked about that this class isn't really in the Bible a whole lot. We're reading God's word, but we could ultimately change an atheist to a believer because we have a little bit of information that, like you said, that the first to plead his case. We've all heard something that sounded good, and then you heard somebody else's side of the story. You're like, oh, well, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. So this is really important for us to know some of this, because this is why people are atheists, because they see and hear information from somebody that sounds good until they hear our reasoning. And we've heard things in this class that are like, how could you not get that?
Right, yeah.
So I appreciate this class.
And as we look more and more into it, you see that how much scientists rely on this, and I've mentioned this every week about speculation, extrapolations, and assumptions. That all this, they say, well, this is how it happened because of all these speculations that they have. He points out that primate fossils, well, first of all, he says, I think 95% of fossils are invertebrates, and the vertebrates make up less than 1%. Primate fossils are a fraction of that 1%, which I don't know what that means much, other than, that's really the way most life is anyways, is when you look at number, but he's just pointing out here that as far as the fossil records go and the things that are preserved, it's a very small number of the things that they're using to extrapolate and base their data on. There's very few things, really. All right, we're going to get into the section here. It calls about how fossil records do not show transitional forms. We mentioned that earlier in the definitions. How it does not show the changing from species to species, and like Brian mentioned, what we call always looking for that missing link to show the link between two species. 2 Timothy 2:23 says, "Having nothing to do with foolish, ignorant controversies, you know that they breed quarrels." And even though Paul wasn't telling Timothy, in relation to fossils, it can still be applied to our studies of evolution and the things that we're looking at today. That don't get involved with their foolishness and these controversies, but know the facts and be able to try to teach it on those things. So here's the three things he broke it down into. One was the reptile to bird, that they say in evolution that the reptile evolved into a bird. The Eopus, I guess how you pronounce it, transition into the horse, and then the ape or monkey transition into mankind. And there's other ones you could probably break that down into, but these are just the three examples that were used in the book. The first one here is the reptile to bird. The author lists these four things. Somebody want to read off those four items for me?
Go ahead.
Anybody good at reading those things?
Archaeopteryx.
Okay.
Sort of.
Sounds good to me.
Archaeoraptor and
Okay. All right, so.
That sounded good.
Yeah.
Just say it with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah, because everybody's going to believe you, right? So these are the four examples of fossils that he mentions. And the first one, Archaeopteryx, is considered to be like this a flying dinosaur. I didn't put a picture. I don't have a picture on the slides, but if you look in the book, they had this picture. I guess I do. I think that's it there, right? Yeah, there you go. I did post it. So that's what it looks like right there in page 66. Also, they were trying to say that this shows a flying reptile that has feathers and feathered wings and teeth, and therefore they try to say that it proves that that there was a transition from a reptile to a bird. And now it says here on page 66, it says the legs that possess teeth and feathers, thus it's unmistakable transition from reptile to bird. Is that unmistakable transition? Does it show unmistakable transition? Okay. However, science has repeatedly drawn out clear anatomical and genetic differences between reptiles and birds that cannot be explained. And then we have this quote here. It's now felt to have evolved from two-legged dinosaur, and as a result, paleontologists must now rearrange the fossil's evidence to accommodate that since animal cannot be older than their ancestors, the Archaeopteryx was actually a flying dinosaur and not a missing link, even though this is still perpetuated not only in textbook, but even in the museums such as the Smithsonian.
That's what's so,
Frustrating.
yeah. They figure out that what they thought is wrong, but they still not gonna do that.
Yeah. And they had to change things. Sometimes it just stays in there. There's several examples of things that are still shown as fact, even though they were proven to be false or fakes, in the studies.
Whereas if it was the medical field, they wouldn't have any problem with going back and saying, okay, well, that's not what we got.
Well, we could argue that one.
Those are the reason of it.
All right. No, but I know what you're saying. The next one here is the Sinosauropteryx, Chinese reptilian wing. And bird sample found in, they're saying that they found this, but they also found bird samples in the exact same place, same layer. So birds along with it. Yeah, so they're, and then the third one is this Archaeoraptor. Ended up being, I think, a hoax, right? I think he talks about this one was, they admitted that it was a hoax, but there's still, oddly, many sources still cite it as real. So that, it goes along with their ideas, so they just keep it in there and don't bother to take it out. And then the last one, called the Chinese bird reptile. It's another feathered dinosaur based on fossil. And they realized that it wasn't actually wings, but connective tissue that they had. And there's a lot of examples of these things that it wasn't as clear cut as they had thought and hoped it would be, and showing their this transitional form from reptile to birds. On the right side, this is something that's always amazed me, and it's not in the book. If you think about God's design of all the flying creatures, He has like flying creatures from all the animal kingdoms, right? Mammals, you have the bats and the insects. You have the billions and billions of ants or insects that are flying, anywhere from the little gnats up to butterflies and birds. Just studying the hummingbird itself is amazing. The ability of its wings and how it does the things it does, to all the massive birds that fly around.
Our memory is unbelievable.
Of who?
They have
Hummingbird?
They have a built-in GPS system. Hummingbird, most recently, Hummingbird Festival, Holly Springs. They live maybe 3 to 5 years, but automatically this time of year, they know pretty much how much they weigh. Is it time to leave? And boom, they're gone.
I didn't know there was such thing.
That just happened to change, There's no design in that, okay?
Well, and he brings up a good point. Yeah, he says it sarcastically. I know, but that's a design, and not only that bird, but why do other birds migrate? Boom, certain time of the year. We have 11,000 species in the world, and we've lost as many or more. And certain time of the year, they know when to leave.
Why didn't they evolve to just stay in the region they were in, right?
Hello. Well, because what's-his-face went to this island of Galapagos, and he makes this massive assumption on things.
Right.
He forgets to take into account temperature, wind, and everything else.
It would have taken them hundreds of thousands of years to come up with that instinct. They'd have died out before it happened.
Yes.
Exactly.
Quit using logic.
And then there's also other animals, that are basically gliders, right? You see flying fish and even some flying squids, squirrels, these things that.
I've never heard of flying squid. I wouldn't want to go.
Yeah, I hadn't either. I ran across it, but but apparently it's a thing. I think it just kind of propels itself out of the water, But any questions on the reptile to bird transitional forms? You can get a lot deeper into it if you want to, obviously, and study these things. The next one is the Eopus to the horse. This is a picture where they show the evolution. I know it's kind of hard to read the labeling of it, but the Eopus is the little one on the far left, which they don't really consider a horse, but that it evolved. I'll read that to you. This is from Babel.ca, one of the resources I've given you. The horse series was constructed from fossils found in many different parts of the world, and nowhere does this succession occur in one location. The arrangement of the evolution of horses is made by aligning various fossils found in India, South America, North America, Europe, and a series of smallest to the largest. So they're taking bits and pieces of bones and putting them all together and making this assumption that this is the evolution of the horse. What do you think of that? Yeah, it does look that way.
would you think a bone found in Europe would belong to a bone found in America?
Yeah.
The base logic doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why they all take these and assume they're associated together, but whatever it does, it fits their ideas and their theory. So that was,
On this one, I was wondering, Epihippus, how do you pronounce it? It looks like a horse, from what they have here. And he talks in the book about its primary differences is the hooves, one being one toe and the other being more than one toe. I still think that could occur in a species.
right, yeah.
So I mean, this is still just a horse. Might be a one hoof or one toe hoof. If that's the difference, that doesn't make it a different species.
Right.
And so this doesn't prove nothing but what we already know, and that's microevolution.
Let's just go to Job 39. Let's read this passage that talks about the horse back in Job's time. Job 39. Somebody wants to read 19 through 25.
Do you give the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? His majestic snorting is terrible. His paws in the valley, and rejoices in his strength. He goes out to meet the weapons. He laughs at fear and is not dismayed. And he does not turn back from the sword. The quiver rattles against him, the flashing spear and javelin. With shaking and rage, he races over the ground. And he does not stand still at the voice of the trumpet. As often as the trumpet sounds, he says, "Aha!" And he scents the battle from afar, and the thunder of the captains and the war cry.
So just a passage here talks about some of the God's creation of the horse. Horses are amazing creatures too. I don't know if you've worked with horses. I have not, but I've read books about them, and you read read books about like Seabiscuit and stuff like that, and it's pretty amazing. They're how smart they are and their personalities, and how they can be competitive too. And that's why they use them for racing a lot, because their competitiveness. But yeah, nothing here shows that it was a transitional form from one another species to another species. And just because you went from a smaller horse to a bigger horse does not mean that it proved microevolution. Nor does it prove any of that. Yeah.
I mean, it clearly states that God created all of its by its kind. So He may have created a small horse, and He may have created a large horse, but it's all a horse. It's not a small one made it to a large one. No, it's its kind. So that's pretty evident. He created it.
I think God's design, that He made the adaptive abilities of all the animal kingdom to be able to adapt to the environment, to nutrition, and all these things. So that's part of the design and part of God's creation.
Still have Shetland ponies, don't we? We still have Clydesdales. I mean, pygmy horses. We still have all that.
Well, you can see the transitions between species in like we see fossils and even frozen in ice and things from the La Brea tar pits and stuff where you've got woolly mammoths, but they're still like elephants, they're pachyderms, they may have hair back then, where maybe the elephants they don't, You got the saber-toothed tigers, which they're still a feline, may have had bigger teeth, but the species has adapted to climates or whatever, like I guess what's that, the microevolution, whatever. But anyway, but it's still within the species. You don't see where they've gone from one species to
many
another.
animals have become extinct. I mean, we talk about that in dinosaurs, that they die out, they become extinct over time, and that's just part of life. It's things.
But reptiles are still here.
Right. Yeah.
It's not the dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So, question for you. So, like when you're talking, at least when I'm talking with someone who believes in evolution, whatever, that one of the things they'll try to do is they'll go, in the last 100 years, because my question is
if evolution is true and real, why are we still not evolving?
That was my thought.
Well, Cecily's like, man, I hope the next evolution's wings, because I'd really like to.
Yeah.
That would be cool, right? But if you talk to someone who's serious about evolution, you know, what they'll bring up is they'll go, well, in the last 100 years, man and women are both, on average, an inch taller. And they'll go, you know, we're not talking about 100 years. To them, they're talking hundreds of millions of years, right? And so 100 years to them is, you know, a drop in the bucket. And they're going, over that time, you know, we continue to evolve. It just happens at such a gradual and slow rate that to us it doesn't seem, you know. So how do we combat that, I guess is a good way. And I don't want to be combative, but I mean, how do we argue or discuss logically, maybe it's better way to put
Well, like you're talking about microevolution, you know, is adaptation within a species, which we don't argue with, and so we agree with that. But it doesn't, you know, just because we're an inch taller doesn't mean that, you know, we're becoming a whole different species of whatever, you know, is next in line according to them, you know.
But in their brains, they see that as evolution. They see as, you know, that man is continuing to, and woman is continuing to grow and to do, and that's what they'll argue. I mean, that's how they'll come back at you, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to go, hey, we're continuing. It's just at such a gradual, slow rate. You know, it takes thousands of years for this to happen.
Well, you can't prove it, you know, because you have no observational ability to do it, like we talked about. You know, you can't observe, you know, all those things, so it makes it, you know, on their side of theory. And the bottom line, it comes down to having faith in the unseen, like we talked about. That's our evidence, is, you know, things.
Well, you know, if evolution happened and was still happening, and like if it's a continual thing, you'd have a bunch of so-called missing links between species walking around or flying around and all, and there's no more what they would call a missing link between species. So I mean, did evolution happen and then it quit? You know?
Yeah.
Because we don't have today any in-between species, so to speak, or missing links, you know. So to me, that right there would disprove evolution or continuing evolution.
One of the best examples I can cite of, I guess, what would be the microevolution is the state bird of Alaska. Don't ask me to pronounce its name, it's P.E. something or other. But Google state bird of Alaska. That bird in the wintertime, all of its feathers are white, so it can hide from its predators in the snow. Throughout the remainder of the year, its colors help match in the foliage, and that bird changes at least twice in the course of the species.
That's good. Next week, we'll continue the study. We're going to get into the ape to man transitional theories that they have. Thank you for your participation.
Congratulations. I guess y'all know